Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 41, and I've got a special guest for you today. But before we get to that, make sure you like, subscribe, follow this whatever platform you're following on, and let's get right into it. My next guest coaches executives and senior leaders across government, private, and not-for-profit sectors. He has been facilitating leadership retreats in the Himalayas, Bali, and the deserts of Australia since 2014. His colorful life has seen him as a global tattooist, a fire dancer, barefoot backpacker, kindergarten teacher, healer, and a corporate leader. His recently published book, The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men, is available through Amazon. You can see him speak on the TEDx stage, which I highly recommend on YouTube, by searching for his name, Jem Fuller. Jem, glad to have you. How are you?
Hey, Dylan. Thank you, man. Yeah, I'm great. Thank you. And thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So I saw your TED Talk, but obviously not everybody here has listened to it yet. Help some people kind of understand your TED Talk. What are you talking about in that TED Talk specifically? And then tell me about your book. I want to hear about this.
Yeah, sure, man. Look, essentially it's about communication, and I think we take communication for granted a lot, and especially when things are good. If you've done something that I think's wonderful and I'm saying, hey, Dylan, that was so cool, man. That's easy. We don't even think about the communication. We sometimes are forced to think about it a little bit more if there's perhaps some feedback that's harder to give or receive, or confrontation or difference. If you have a strong opinion about something and I have a differing strong opinion about something, then we're like, oh man, this communication's tricky, Yeah. But communication really, when you think about it, is the conduit to just about every aspect of the quality of our life. When you think about taking an idea and manifesting it into reality, you can't do that without communication. Einstein's brilliant understandings of the mechanics of the universe would have meant nothing if he couldn't then communicate them, right? And then also communication is this bridge between isolation and connection. And as a species, we need each other, right? We've only been able to evolve successfully in society, in community, in working together. It's a big part of us as a species. And so isolation, and this is something that's been put on the front of the table over the last couple of years for a lot of us humans, who have been forced into isolation. And, depression rates have gone up, and anxiety and suicide and everything's gone up. We need each other, and communication is this conduit for connection. And also, it's the quality of our relationships, our ability to communicate. You can have two people that love each other dearly, but can miss each other in the communication of that, and it can end up being not so nice. Or also organizationally, you can have two departments in an organization. Say you've got the sales department and the finance department. They're both working for the same organization. They should be wanting the same end goal, but quite often there's disturbance in the force, shall we speak? Shall we say, because of the lack of communication or the ability to understand each other. So I think it's a really important thing. And man, you're watching this as well, this people shouting at each other across these digital platforms. I call it shouting at each other over the digital divide of difference. And that this shouting at each other, which is not conscious communication, it's unconscious communication, is not actually evolving the situation. It's not actually making anything better. It's just deepening that divide, and I think we need to work together. So yeah, that's what I'm kind of on about.
So what I love about this, and what I loved about that TED Talk is I think you get it, right? Like this is something I've been talking about as well for the past 2 years, specifically, but for many years. Communication is the fundamental aspect of how we grow everything else. It's the living kind of undercurrent that allows everything else to flow. And I'm curious, when you see this lack of communication, wherever it is, where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from our inherent and necessary sense of identity. So we all have an ego, which is our sense of who we think we are. And the ego has arguably evolved with us as a species as a defense mechanism. So it's there, essentially, it's there to keep us safe. It's fueled by fear. It's super, super defensive. When we're not aware of it, i.e. when we're not aware that it's our ego that's driving our reactions, it's to its own end, and we identify with our politic, we identify with our ideology. That creates part of who we think we are. So when someone challenges our political standpoint or our ideological standpoint, we take it completely personally, and we get really, really defensive, and we fight with each other.
Yeah.
Whereas the problems, the biggest problems, like I say in the talk, they're problems for us all, man. Global warming and pandemics and inequality does not discriminate.
No.
We're all copping it. So to solve these bigger problems, we've got to lean into our differences. It's in the diversity where we will find the truly remarkable solutions. You and I might agree on 80% of the things, and that's nice, and that's a good place to start, but it's the 20% where you and I differ. That's where the gold is.
Yeah.
We can only lean into that by putting our ego aside, letting go of the need to be so defensive about my point of view, and really seeking to understand. If you've got a different point of view to me, that's where I'm wanting to lean in and go, wow, where's Dylan coming from, man? I really want to try and get him here,
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of I don't know if you know who Rick Rigsby is, but he said something in a talk that I loved. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. I've loved that quote since I heard it. I was like, that is one of the few quotes I actually can remember by memory. And it's so true, right? Like when you craft that ego into something that is like a freight train, right? When it cannot be stopped, you're doing stupid things, right? You're doing unhealthy things. It's not even about stupidity necessarily, but it's certainly unhealthy in many ways, because when you do something that is wrong and no one can tell you about it, what are you doing to yourself?
Right. And it's so true what you say. I love that quote. I've never heard it, and I'm going to get you to email it to me.
Absolutely.
But the thing about the ego and its complete defensive nature, it doesn't actually mind what's healthy for you or not.
Mm-hmm.
If you've identified as someone who suffers depression, if you've identified as someone who has a tough life and things are terrible, if you've identified as someone who is angry or whatever, the ego will defend that.
Yep.
Even to your own demise. So it's completely self-serving, and like you say, it's not necessarily intelligent.
Yeah. And I look at this, and I've tried to kind of contemplate a little of this. I went to a talk with Jordan Peterson the other last week, and it was really remarkable. He brought something up that I really liked, but this idea of the difference between like rationality and logic, right? I kind of look at rationality as this fundamental idea that everything you've ever felt is valid, right? There's a cause and an effect to what you've been through. However, that doesn't always mean it's logical, right? That doesn't always mean it's the right way to feel your way through it, or the beneficial way to feel your way through it. And that's where logic kind of comes in to invalidate rationality. And where Jordan Peterson kind of comes in is he gave this talk and talked about something called ethics, and I've kind of equated it to what I've talked about, values, right? Very similar, I think. And I don't know how he defines ethics. I'm really curious about that. But this fundamental structure of how you operate is, I think, essentially missing in most people's lives. Where, I think throughout history, religion has been such a mainstay in human culture that there's been rules, right? There's been fundamental ideas of saying this is what's right and wrong. Did everybody follow it? Absolutely not. Religion has its own set of risks and rewards versus other things, but we're seeing a deconstruction of religion right now, and there's less cultural specific or familial rules in place that say, empathy is valuable here, or compassion is valuable here, or kindness, or all of the different ethics and values that create structure for a person to say, I need to be disciplined in how I think through this. And I asked you the question of, where do you think this comes from? And that's my answer, right? Is that, when we look at the ego, we're actually looking at how the structure of what you find valuable and how you defend it and how you support it,
Mm,
people don't know what to defend. So they defend the unhealthy things, right? So
mm.
depression becomes the almost becomes the value. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah. Like the
PTSD,
identity.
trauma, yeah,
Yeah,
these
yeah,
things
yeah. So
become the value.
yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense, and perhaps, if the ego is scrambling around for something really tangible to identify with, and in the past, say it could identify with, I am a Christian, or I am a Muslim, or I am a Hindu, or I am a Jew, or something tangible with a set of guidelines and values that we all agree is the best way for us to operate as a society, right? And as that collapses or moves, or we move through and evolve from that into whatever's coming, that there's this space there, and the identity, the ego, is looking for something that it can actually really grab onto and identify with.
Yep.
So the most visceral human experiences, the strongest emotions, the strongest kind of thinking patterns, the ego identifies with and goes, that's me, that's what I am, that's who I am. Yeah, man. Yeah, I
Well,
think that's possibly
and
what's happening, huh?
and even to a detriment, right? Like when when an abuser recognizes that he's an abuser, because that's kind of where I deal with a lot of people.
Mm,
I deal with the victims of abusers, oftentimes, or survivors of abusers. When an
mm,
abuser recognizes that he's an abuser or she's an abuser, one of the first things that you sometimes hear is, "Well, I can't change now," right? Like it's such an identity shift in that this has become so valuable to who I am. This is how it's made me survive. I survived the world because of this. You know,
yeah, yeah.
and it may be linked back to trauma, it may be linked back to, terrible childhood or young
Mm,
adulthood, but in the
mm,
end, in that moment, you're defending what helped you survive. And
yeah.
that relinquishing of this tool is not so easy because it's so hardly, so firmly linked into
Yeah,
how I've gotten through life.
yeah, and like that's just so true, and the misconception here is that from the ego's point of view, death of ego, an identity crisis. If I'm not that, then I'm dead. To
Yeah.
to the ego, it's akin to real death. So having a an identity crisis or a breakdown, the death of ego, is super scary to the ego. Super scary. I've been lucky enough to have two identity crises of sorts in my life. The first time, when I was 27, 28, scared the hell out of me. I really fell apart, because I'm like, well, if I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not all these things that I thought I was, then who am I? And I think I'm going to die. And I came out the other end of, drug abuse and deep, deep depression, and then spent a couple of years wandering around India to find myself, which was essentially to recreate my sense of identity. And that time was super scary because I'd never been through it before, and it felt like I was actually going to die. Second time, in my early 40s, when I had my midlife awakening, I call it, I kind of knew that I was going to be okay. It's like, okay, I'm shedding an old identity, but I'm going to be all right. I'll wake up and I'll keep breathing, and the sun will keep coming up. And it's actually an opportunity now. Who do I want to be? Which values do I want to live by? So I'm not religious, I'm not following a doctrine, but what values do I want to live by? And let's get super clear on that, and then wake up each morning and do our affirmations and say, hey, this is the type of person I want to show up as today.
So when it happened the first time, I'm really curious, what was it that kind of brought you to this idea of, I love how you said it, shedding this identity? Like
Mm,
what in that first time, obviously it wasn't so simple as, making it that simple of shedding an identity. Let's
mm,
move on to the
mm,
next one.
mm.
What was it that kind of brought you to this structuring or restructuring of, I can live, I can be valuable, I can do something different? What is it? Well, what was it that kind of helped you get there?
So when I was at the bottom of the pit, and I developed a stutter, my confidence was so broken that I was speaking so quietly that if I got on a bus, the bus driver would ask me, sorry, what did you say? I started to notice that people couldn't hear me because I was whispering and stuttering. I was abusing drugs. I was lost. I was in a different city on the other side of the world. And I'd forgotten, because I'd let go of the vehicles that I'd identified with. You know, the vocation wasn't there anymore. Being her partner wasn't there anymore. I had the broken heart and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, my angel was my sister. My sister from Australia happened to be over in London, and she came in and she found me and said, hey, remember what you're doing? You were saving up to go back to India. So I bought a ticket to India, and I had enough money. So I was very lucky. I'd saved enough money to not have to work for a year, living very simply. So cooking on a fire and, you know, cooking my own veggies and living outdoors, living rough, but I could live for a year. And so I ran an experiment, and this is coming to answer your question. What helped me move through that identity death and then rebuild? And I ran an experiment. I went, you know what? I don't know who I am. I've got no desire on what I want to do, or where I want to be other than right here, right now. So I'm going to run an experiment. I'm going to have zero design on the future, as in, I don't even know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And I'm not going to identify as that thing that you do, because you meet people and you go, hi, I'm Jem. They go, hey, Jem, what do you do? It's the first question everyone asks.
Yeah.
And I had nothing to answer to that. So I said, that's okay. Let go. You don't have to have an answer for that. You know, I'm just in this moment. And I ran this experiment. And what happened, the year of walking around India that came from this experiment, was a year of remarkable flow. You know, like India, for most people, India is a country that teaches you patience. You turn up to the train station, it takes you an hour to get a ticket and 6 hours to get on the train, right?
Yeah.
And I had that experience in India. You go to the bank to take out some money, and you have to go to 10 different banks and argue with lots of people. Everything's a mission, right? When I dropped into flow, I kid you not, Dylan, I would turn up to the train station and the train would be leaving as I would step onto it and go. You know, I'd need money and money would come. I'd need a conversation and a conversation would, like, it was just beautiful. And so through that year, I just allowed myself a lot of contemplation. You know, I traveled on my own. I was determined to travel on my own for a couple of years, actually. And I just allowed a lot of contemplation. And I don't know what brought me to this space, but I was really like, who do I want to be? And that's not what do I want to do? That's what sort of a person do I want to be in this moment? How do I want to show up? How do I want to treat other people? And so from that comes your values, right? Your core values, which you were talking about before, is missing for a lot of people. And just bringing it into conscious awareness rather than it being a subconscious thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause those core values, I keep going back to them, but they're foundational in decision-making, because you have to, you know, if you want to show up as an empathetic person, you have to be willing to define what empathy means to you. And it may not necessarily mean what the definition is in the dictionary. It may mean something slightly different, because you have to, you know, and this is what I kind of work with my clients on. You have to be willing to put boundaries on the upper echelon of what overutilization of that core value is and underutilization of that core value is. Because if you're too empathetic, you're going to get abused. If you're not empathetic enough, you're a narcissist, right? And you're creating different negative outcomes for you either way. And so when you have the authority to step into that value and say, I have to be this, right? I have to enact this rule in terms of, this is what empathy means to me. I have to follow through with it. And that creates value for me, you know, and for me, it guides my value, or it guides my boundaries. Like,
Yeah.
I can only be so empathetic. I can only show up for so many people. And that's one of my struggles, is that I've got almost 600,000 followers on TikTok. I can't show up for all of them. I have to show up for who is willing to actually show up for me. You know, and so it's
and using those values back towards the way you treat yourself. You know,
right.
A lot of us go, right, I'm empathetic, I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm, you know, giving and blah, blah, blah. And that's all outward.
Right.
But, you know, if you're not treating yourself with the same love, the same compassion, the same empathy, then it's only half of the equation.
Absolutely.
You know,
you have to add self to all of those values and make
100%. 100%. And for people who are wanting to go from where they are now to where they want to be, and if you're in your life at the moment, if you experience a fair bit of suffering, whatever that is for you, and you want to move to a place of less suffering, it's got to start with you. You know, because if you think about it, I know you get this, man. I just love this conversation. Our whole experience of life is in our mind, right? We receive the information from around us in bits, you know, through our senses.
Yeah.
and these bits of information, and we represent these bits of information in our mind. So yes, there is a real world out there, but our experience of that world is in here. The quality of your mind very much determines the quality of your experience of life. And the quality of our mind is our relationship with self. If you're not being compassionate to self, accepting of self, loving of self, kind of self, then you're capping your ability to be able to then go and live a meaningful life of contribution. Yeah.
Yeah. The deliverance of expectations is such a detriment, right? Like if
Yeah,
you
completely.
want to talk about that quality of life and that quality of your experience, if you're delivering expectations to yourself that are outside of your bounds or outside of your boundaries,
Mm,
that's adding that self to that value. I mean, you're not going to ever reach to that height. Like you want to be able to actually achieve what you're trying to get
yeah.
to.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
not everybody's going to be, LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, all of these incredibly profound athletes.
Mm,
Not everybody's going to do that in their own
no,
way. You
no.
have to be able to actually achieve something, and all of them did achieve something small to get to something big.
Yeah.
And those expectations start with how you make decisions, how you
Mm,
actually look at yourself. And we both know this, but I think we can have this conversation for hours and still not
yeah.
be tired of it, because this is
I,
just,
I think it's important that we have these
it
conversations too.
is.
We should be talking about this because it's the only way really functional and constructive change occurs is through proper conversations like this, you know?
Absolutely. And this is communication, right? Like we're talking, like we've spent years, maybe you've spent decades, I probably spent decades now, but
Mm,
digging into this within
mm,
ourselves, and having these argumentative conversations with ourselves and saying,
yeah.
what the fuck is wrong with you, Dylan? What are you
Yeah.
doing to yourself? Why are you
Yeah.
doing,
Yeah.
like, this is where it
Yeah.
started for me, is
Yeah.
why are you the way that you are?
Mm,
And that question, it blew my mind, because I had to be honest with myself of like, because
mm.
you can't be dishonest about that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
start blaming other people, you're going to be like, well, they didn't make the choice to do that. You
No,
did.
man, you can start blaming other people and the environment if you want, but it is a waste of your energy and it is a waste of your mental capacity and your time.
Yeah.
It actually doesn't get you anywhere. And I understand it's a default because it's an avoidance of facing up to yourself and your own responsibility. But it is futile. It doesn't get you anywhere. I think for me a really a big step. And when I say a step, it didn't just kind of happen once and I got it. It's become a habitual practice for me. Is
Yeah.
radical self-acceptance. 100%. And I don't mean about the future. I don't mean that I don't want to keep improving and evolving and expanding into my potential. I mean, in this moment right here, if we could take a snapshot in time right now, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be, apparently, because here I am, just
Right.
like this, right? I could argue with that. I should say, but I should be more like him, or I should be more like that, or I should be
Yeah.
better, but I'm not. So that argument is futile. So it's better. It makes more functional sense to me to go, hang on a second. Apparently, I should be exactly the way I am. And everything that's happened in my past should have. Not because it was necessarily all pleasant or good or functional. Some of it was messed up, but it should have happened. Why? Well, because it did. So this radical self-acceptance piece then allows us to go, okay, cool. So now as I look forward, where do I hope to improve as me, not being Michael Jordan, just being me?
Mm-hmm.
How can I continue to be the best version of me? And whether the positive impact I have on my life and other people's lives is just for my wife and my children, that's enough, man.
Yeah.
You don't have to change the world if you don't want to. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Right. Well, there's a piece of this, right, that is, this is where I think this gets complicated. This conversation gets really complicated, because I look at my life, and I see other people who have made choices in my life that have made radical differences, right? My dad committed suicide when I was 6. And for
Wow.
a long time, I looked at that and I blamed him, right? And in throughout the years and through my own kind of self-discovery of accepting me and accepting that very same concept of being able
Mm,
to look at me and be like, I'm here for a reason, right? I found myself in 2015 with a gun to my head, and I said, why am I here? Why
Mm,
am I doing what I'm doing right now? And I had to kind of create that understanding that I'm here for whatever reasoning is out there. I'm here now, and
mm,
I need to understand that. So when I took that look back, but where it becomes really complicated, I think, is when we start looking at the impacts of other people's choices on us. It's really hard for a lot of people to differentiate the understanding that I had a choice in anything versus this person's choice destroyed me, and that childhood
mm,
era is kind of the thing that I'm talking about. Is because at 6 years old, there was
mm.
no fundamental way that I could have had any impact on my dad, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course, man. And it's also understandable that a 6-year-old would, blame their dad and also maybe, you know, be pissed off and think, why, was I not good enough for you to hang around for? Was I not
Yeah,
reason enough for you to hang around? I'm a 6-year-old son, man. So it's completely understandable that a 6-year-old would go through all of that, right?
yeah,
And I think it's complex. Like you say, it's complex and intricate, this conversation, because there's an apparent duality for us humans.
yeah,
Beyond the human experience, arguably everything's one and there's a unified field of energy, right? But from the human point of view, we see duality in everything. There's day and night, there's yin and yang, masculine and feminine. There's also, I'm at the center of my experience of the universe, and I'm also a tiny, 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 tiny speck in the grand scheme of everything, right?
yeah,
So, from my point of view, the fact that my dad, when I was 6 years old, lost his temper and beat me up, right? From my point of view, it was all about me. But outside of me, it wasn't about me. It was about a man who was a father and didn't know how to be any different in that moment,
yeah.
you know. And so, yeah, I think it does. It gets complex, and it's worth unpacking, because the more we can get clarity around the complexities of being us here, it can make it a little bit easier.
Yeah. It's such a difficult thing to kind of help people through, and not everybody's going to get there. Not everybody's going to make it through what we've made it through.
Mm,
Unfortunately, that's our own duality of, we're trying to help people, we're trying to help
yeah.
society, and the reality is that we're not going to be able to help everybody.
No, and you certainly can't help people that don't want help.
Right. And that's,
You yeah.
if there's anything, I think anyone that is trying to help people needs to understand, it's that
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't help people that don't want to be helped, and
No.
people will reach out to me like, hey, I need you to talk to my son. I'm like, but does your son want me to
Yeah,
help
yeah.
him?
Man, I
Because
had this conversation with my mum when I was a teenager. And so I was brought up in a Christian household, and mum was Catholic and dad was Uniting Church. And I went to church every Sunday, and I went to a Catholic high school, etc. When I was 16, I said, guys, I'm not coming to church anymore. And they were both fine. I remember having this conversation with my mum about missionaries, about evangelists. And I was saying to her, Mum, I disagree with someone trying to tell other people who don't want to know, like going into a village in the Amazon and telling these people that they have to become Christian, because if they don't, they're damned to hell. And my mum said, yeah, but the missionary's coming with good intention, like they want to save their souls. And I said, okay, mum, a couple of things here. If someone wants their soul saved, if someone comes to you and says, hey, you look happy, can you share the way you do things with me? By all means, share,
yeah,
right? But if someone's just living their own life, I think it's wrong to go up and tap on their shoulder, break into their village and say, you all got it wrong, you need to do it this way. And I said, Mum, how can billions of Muslims and Hindus and Jews, how can they all be wrong? How can they all be going to hell? And Mum, luckily enough, was intelligent enough to go, all right, son, you've got a point. you know.
that I, I love this. I love where you've taken this. How do you think society is going to reach that understanding? Like, overall, how do you think people are going to start to recognize that, like, that idea of stepping into someone that doesn't want them or doesn't want their ideas? um how are we going to be able to just kind of leave that alone? Do you think we're ever
Yeah.
going to get there?
Well, that's the first part I was going to answer. I don't know if we ever will.
Yeah,
I don't know if we ever will. And it's a race against, the damage that we're doing to the planet, and whether the planet has enough of us and wipes us all out. Because, we weren't here the other day,
Yeah.
as a species. Like in the grand scheme of time, we weren't here just the other day.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty egotistical to think that we are going to be around forever. So
Yeah.
the question for me more is about the quality of how are we now? How are we showing up now? And look, I know confirmation bias, and I know we kind of meet the people that fit with our map of what's going on. I'm meeting a heap of good people like you at the moment, in the last couple of years especially. And I think one of the benefits of of the World Wide Web and where we've taken it with the social media and the platforms and all of this kind of stuff is that conversations like this globally are much easier to have and share than ever before. So the more conversations like this happen, I think it's kind of catchy. And I meet people, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I get inspired by it. I go, wow, what a great way of thinking. I'm going to adopt that. I would never have had access to that way of thinking prior. And reading books, I love books, but reading books is laborious, and you've got to go and buy it from a bookshop or the library or whatever. So, man, I think potentially, I don't know, to me, it feels like there's some kind of evolution happening. But at the same time, obviously, there's still narcissistic people in power who do psychopathic, terrible things. So we're kind of pushing shit uphill, if you know what I mean.
Obviously, at this time. And who knows, we'll figure out what happens at the end. But yeah, I mean, I was just having this conversation with someone about about what is social media. Is social media good for us? Is it bad for us? And I very much feel that kind of sentiment in terms of like, there's this scale of information and access to it that is beyond what human history has ever allowed us. And it's creating this almost, it's like drinking through a fire hose right now, of like, if you want to hear anything, it's out there, right? You can have access to absolutely any kind of perspective that you would ever want to listen to or hear. And even ones that you don't want to hear about are out there. And it's really remarkable to see that. And certainly there are risks involved, and we don't know whether this is really bad or not. But I think it's generally trending up. I think it's generally this ability to have open conversations like this. This wasn't happening, 50 years ago, where not only us, I'm sure there's another podcast going on talking about similar things, where there's multiple people talking about the same thing. And then not only that, but it's shareable to the world, to anybody, anybody without censorship, obviously can hear this stuff. And that's really interesting to me.
Yeah. Hey, man, there's a great book. I don't know if you've come across it. It's called Humankind, by a Dutch man called Rutger Bregman. And I love this book because he makes so many good arguments based on research, based on evidence, showing that humans are by nature essentially kind. We want to do good. We want to work shit out. We want to be able to work together. We really do. And as much as the literature would say that, Lord of the Flies, the story Lord of the Flies, when the kids get left alone on an island and they turn savage and they eat each other and blah, blah, blah. That book was written by an alcoholic, misogynist, abusive father. Right. And that book got taken as this psychological study on humans. Phenomenon, it's not. It was a study on some dude who was messed up.
Yeah.
Right. There's a real story of Lord of the Flies, a real story of some Samoan boys in the Southwest Pacific who stole a boat, and they went out and they got lost and they got shipwrecked, and they lived on an island for a couple of years, man. Teenage boys with nothing, and they survived. They didn't turn on each other. They developed a code of how to look after each other. They developed a code. They kept a fire burning for 2 years. They developed a code on how to grow food and work together as a team. And he argues in this book that this is our human nature. We get the stories that sell. So, Hurricane Katrina, and the stories we got here in Australia is that people were robbing and looting and raping and pillaging each other. That's not the truth. Humans were looking out for each other. Humans were predominantly trying to help each other. That's what we do. So, yeah, I think that the news will sell us the stuff that sells, which is the horror and the drama and how we're all selfish and horrible. But I think given half a chance, humans are pretty good.
It's really interesting because there's a couple things I want to bring to the table here. Is one, I watched a TED talk recently. It's an older one. There's talking about how the history of violent violence is actually has historically trended down uh, throughout time. And even you look at World War II, and certainly that was a massive uh, violent piece.
Mm,
But
mm,
overall, violence has trended down throughout history. But not only that, like it brings me to an understanding of like it. Oddly enough, it takes me to hunting, right? And hunting has always been really intriguing to me. Like I come from a war background and also a hunting background. I have a lot of friends that hunt, and there's this ceremonial kind of uh, respect for the animal
mm,
throughout history with hunting. You kill an animal, and so many cultures look at that, and you talk about kindness, right?
mm,
If we were kind, we wouldn't have this ceremonial idea that this animal is feeding us, that we're
mhm,
thankful for it, that we're appreciative of it. Now, I
mm,
think in some ways we might be straying away from that with like mass farming and
mm.
having someone else kill our animals for us to eat. But
Yeah.
but if you took anyone out to kill a deer right now that's never killed a deer,
Mm,
I guarantee you they would have some kind of emotional feeling when they see that animal die, right?
mm,
And so like anecdotally, I can see that, like that we have that kindness, that we have that empathy, that compassion to say this animal is giving its life so that I may live, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so like certainly there's always going to be uh those exceptions to the rule of the psychopaths, the sociopaths, and
Mm,
historically it's probably going to be about 2% of the population.
yeah.
um but majority of humans care. Majority of people understand that we need each other. um
Yeah. And I think the problem is, man, like you say, that we care when it's in our face.
mhm,
But if there's 2 or 3 or 4 degrees of separation and we are treating animals completely inhumanely
yeah,
to put that chicken on the supermarket shelf, or to put that piece of steak on the supermarket shelf wrapped in some plastic and kids don't even know where it came from.
yeah,
But those animals are getting treated in horrible ways.
yeah,
That's crazy, right? And then also, there's been lots of experiments done with humans as well around, this is why World Vision will sell their donation packages by putting the face of one child on their marketing, because we see the face of one child and our heart goes, oh, poor kid. But if you tell them that millions of people are starving, we kind of go, oh, that's over there. I'm not really attached to that because I've got to wake up and make my coffee right now.
yeah.
So it's funny, we are kind in the face of it. you know
We just don't have the capacity to think globally at this point, right? We just have
well, we
too
we
much to think
don't,
about.
yeah. Yeah, and we're wired, like, you go all the way back in our wiring, we're wired locally.
Yeah,
And we can conceive of a certain area, a certain number of people that fit within a tribe, so to speak, and to be able to have empathy for the more global picture is a practice, right? Compassion is something that you need to practice and get really good at. And also we're wired linear, how do you say this? Linearly.
yeah.
You know what I
Linearly,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
So
hard
we
word.
can, yeah. So we can conceive of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We can't conceptualize exponential growth,
Yeah,
which is what's happening with the world right now. And we can't, I heard this thought experiment. You say to someone, imagine you were to walk north 30 linear steps, where would you be? And we can conceive, we go, oh, I'd be over on the other side of the street. But if we say to someone, if you took 30 exponential steps, so one becomes 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on, where would you end up? And people have no idea. It's 27 laps around the earth,
wow.
27 laps.
Yeah,
And most of those laps happen in the last few steps,
right,
and this is technological growth at the moment, is exponential. So for
right.
us to try and even conceive of what it'll look like at 2050, our brains are just not capable of doing it.
Right. It's just I mean, I just look at myself, right? And again, like local thinking, right? I look at myself over the last 2 years. Like I was a completely different person 3 years ago, right?
Mm.
3 years ago, uh, March of 2019, I was in Afghanistan, right?
Wow, man. That's
And
just the
now,
other day. Huh?
right. And now, like, to me, that's like, that's so far back, right? And now I'm here with, back then I didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to like help people. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach people how to shoot guns. That was kind of my dream. I was like, I want to I want to
Mm.
teach people how to shoot guns
Mm.
at a long distance because I'm a long range shooter. I love it. It's my thing.
Man, can you just tell me a little bit about coming home and how the hell do you assimilate, man? How the hell do you kind of heal? I've got no idea. I really have got no idea.
The second time was a lot easier than the first time. I will
Uh-huh.
say that, right? The first time, um, it was there was a direct correlation to my own suicide.
Yeah.
That's how it kind of ultimately did or happened because I didn't address the problems that I faced,
Mm.
right? Like 2012, I go to Afghanistan. I go to Kunar province, Afghanistan, which is where like three out of four medals of honor in Afghanistan were given or earned at the time.
Yeah.
And Medal of Honor is the highest award someone can give. Usually, you get it posthumously.
Yeah.
Um, and so I saw a lot of stuff. I saw triple amputees. I saw a guy with half a head, like
Oh, dude.
walking off a helicopter.
Mm.
There's a significant, like he had a bandage, but it was significantly flat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Across half his head, and he's still walking and talking. I'm like, that can't be how,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Like, and so I'm an impressionable 22-year-old kid, right? Trying to
Mm.
figure all this stuff out. I see this stuff and just a massive amount of stress. I got ulcers while I was over there and I didn't even care. Right. I would go to breakfast and eating food was one of the things that actually made me comfortable.
Mm.
And so I would love meal times because I was in so much pain by that time. Because I
Yeah.
was working 20 to 22 hours a day. Uh, and it was brutal, and finally
Mm.
I come home. One, I had never dealt with my dad's death. I had never
Yep.
dealt with, the bullying or the child abuse that I went through afterwards. I never dealt with PTSD from Afghanistan. And
Yeah.
so I did whatever I wanted. I acted like I was immature.
Yeah.
I was a I was just addicted to this idea of death because I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I really went to Afghanistan because I wanted to die.
Wow.
Early on in my career because of my dad's situation and how I thought about it. I just
Yeah.
didn't want to be here anymore, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
do it. I wouldn't do what my dad did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so returning, I I just I shoved it all down, right? We're having this conversation about communication for one reason. It's
Yeah.
because I'm doing the opposite, right?
Uh-huh.
I,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
radical honesty, radical acceptance of myself because I
Yeah.
was radically deceitful of myself. I was
Oh, yeah.
radically deceitful to everyone around me because they'd ask me, "How are you?" I'm
Yeah.
fine. I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
solid. Like living the dream, right? Like I was
Yeah. Yeah.
lying through my teeth every single day. You
Yeah.
could have given me an Academy Award for how much acting I did through those first
Yeah.
3 years after I got home
Yeah.
because
Right.
people just didn't understand. I told my friends, I told my friend Chris and Carrie, and we talked about this recently.
Mm.
The day after I almost committed suicide, I told them about it, and they were like, "Holy shit, we had no idea.
Yeah.
We had no idea." Those guys were the closest people in my life at the time. Not even my mom and my sister were as close as they were. They had
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
clue what I was feeling.
Yeah.
And when I look back at what happened this 2 years ago now, when I came home, I was honest. I had a wife, I had a stepson,
Yeah.
and my wife knew about what happened because at that point I'm starting to write my book. So I'm like, I got to be honest with her about everything. And I was
Yeah.
honest with her in 2016 when I met her.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but it was a completely different scenario being honest with everything, you
So
know?
the first step to your honesty, the first step into vulnerability was through feeling safe in a relationship with someone who loved you completely.
Well, obviously that relationship was safe, but the first step with my honesty was actually quite the opposite. Was feeling safe within myself.
Oh, great. Love it. Love it. Love it. That's the first step. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Because I started my journey of trying to kind of rekindle my appreciation for myself
Uh-huh.
before I ever met my wife.
It's so true, man. Yeah, and that's been my experience as well. And arguably, who knows, but arguably she showed up in your life because you'd been doing that work on yourself.
100%. hundred
Uh-huh.
percent. I
Uh-huh.
because what's funny about that is like we met online and then she I don't drink. I've never had alcohol. I've never had,
Right.
alcohol, drugs, or tobacco. I've never done any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And she wanted to meet at a bar. And I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I don't care. I just want to meet
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then I tell her, she asked me questions, right? She kind of digs into me. And this is one of the things that I was always looking for. I was looking for empathy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I set out this purpose of like, I want to find someone that is empathetic enough to respect my story and
Yeah.
appreciate what I've had to go through. And the
Yeah.
first thing she did was kind of ask me about my life
Uh-huh.
and expected me to be honest. And I'm like,
Yeah.
or fuck it, we're doing it live. I'm
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm telling her. And the only thing I
Yeah.
didn't tell her about was my own suicide attempt at the time
Yeah.
because that was kind of fresh. But I ended up
Yeah,
telling her
man.
like
Bit
three
heavy on the
weeks
first
later.
date at a
Right.
bar, you know.
But like at that point, I was able to verbalize this stuff, talk about this stuff, and she appreciated it. She loved my honesty. She loved my willingness
Yeah.
because she hadn't had someone with that ability, that honesty,
Yeah.
or that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I love it.
yeah, and when
I
when you
relate, man.
when you start to really dig into yourself, like this, like
Mm.
it changes every interaction from there on.
Yeah, completely. It does, man. And your interaction, not just with people, but with life itself, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a positive way.
Yep.
But yeah, I completely relate, dude. I spent years, and I could have won an Academy Award as well.
Yeah.
I was in this marriage, and from the outside, everyone thought I had this wonderful marriage and I had this great corporate job and I had a couple of kids and the white picket fence and blah, blah, blah. But all of my deepest anxieties and self-loathing
Yep.
and, the belief that I wasn't good enough, I put it all into one place that I was too ashamed to talk about. For 10 years, I was so embarrassed and so ashamed because as a man, I was failing at the most fundamental thing for me as a man, which was in sex, to be able to take my woman sexually, and I developed severe sexual anxiety and couldn't perform. I would either prematurely ejaculate or I would be so anxious I would have an anxiety attack and I couldn't even get an erection. It just became horrible. And so after years, my wife couldn't trust that I could be that for her, so she just wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
And I got trapped and stuck and I didn't know how to get out, but I couldn't tell anyone.
Right.
Everyone would go, "Oh, hey, Jem, how are you?" "Oh, I'm great, man." I
Yeah.
wasn't great. I was
Shame.
destroyed and so ashamed.
Yeah.
And it was this secret torture for such a long time. And it wasn't until I started to actually practice some self-acceptance, some self-love, and start to love myself just the way I was with my problems, to properly love myself and have some self-compassion and empathy, that I started to shift things. Now it was too late for the marriage. I had a, midlife crisis and I lost my career, lost my marriage, lost my house. I walked away with my kids, thankfully, 50-50 with my two boys and 100 grand worth of debt. That's all I left with.
Yeah.
But I left with a renewed sense of I'm going to learn to love myself properly. And what happened was that as I started to do that, everything shifted. My partner now, and I'm super lucky, Dylan, to be in a remarkably conscious, beautiful, wonderful relationship with an incredible human who's my other half. And a fully functional, wonderful tantric sex life, which is great. I'm so relieved to say, because I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get that or not.
Yeah.
But through learning to love myself, and like you said, when you met your partner, your wife, that you were completely honest with her. And I was the same with my woman when we met, and I was honest with her and I said, "Hey, I got a lot of stuff that I'm sorting through. I'm working it out, but there's stuff there. I'm just going to be straight with you." And she said, "I don't mind.
Yeah.
100% don't mind. That's not why I'm feeling attracted to you right now. I'm falling in love with you because of who you are, just the way you are, you know? And anyway, so yeah, I relate, man. And it's so nice now, isn't it? So liberating to be able to just be 100% authentic and honest. If I'm having a day that's not great, I'm just going to tell you,
Yeah.
you know, and if I'm having a day that's wonderful, I'm going to tell you, but I've got nothing to hide anymore, which is such a liberation.
Yeah. I'm reading a book. I'm not sure if you've ever read it, but When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate.
No, I
Oh
haven't.
man, it's when you look at this, what we're talking about right now in both of our situations, right? When you carry the weight of not being able to share things,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And you this can go all the way back to being a baby, right? When the body is put in a situation where it does not have the ability to express itself, you place yourself, or you place upon yourself burdens that your body takes on, that realistically your body is supposed to learn how to express, right? So when a baby's crying and it's not catered to, it stops crying and people are like, awesome, it learned. But that's not the case, right? The baby stopped crying, but the stress from the cry before is
uh-huh,
maintained, right?
uh-huh.
And so when you look at this in human life, is that we look at, we've kind of looked at mental health like, oh, they're just doing it for attention.
Mm,
Yes, obviously they're doing it for attention because it's something that they've lacked for so many years,
yeah,
that
yeah.
now that they've stopped, now is when you need to worry about it, because their stress levels are still high, but
Mm,
now they can't even go outside for attention. They can't even find the validation to help them understand how to overcome this stuff. It's like
yeah,
we're carrying so much stress within our bodies without having the ability to express it in certain
yeah,
situations, because of shame, because of guilt, because of regret. And
yeah,
what does that do to our bodies? Well, it creates physical ailments like autoimmune
yeah,
diseases.
yeah.
It creates heart disease.
Tumors.
It's creating these
Yeah,
things that,
yeah,
you know, we hypothetically we could stop if we
yeah,
learned
because
how
it's
to express
dis-ease,
ourselves.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And
Eh,
think about it too, man. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but you know, there's a lot of indoctrination by culture, so
Yeah.
accidental indoctrination. And think about from the male point of view, right? Now
Yeah.
I'm going to generalize here, but as boys growing up, and it's probably the same in your culture because we're quite similar.
Yeah.
Boys get told, "Suck it up, man up, toughen up, don't
Yeah.
cry like a girl, don't blah blah blah." Wow, what? We're telling our boys that to survive, you cannot express your emotions. You
Which is
cannot be vulnerable, you know?
which is funny because one of the most expressive emotions in males is anger.
Yeah, right.
And apparently we're sold and packaged that anger is not an emotion. And so it's okay
Yeah,
to feel anger, but you can't feel anything else.
yeah,
But the reality is like we have an unhealthy relationship with anger because we don't know how to express anything else.
uh-huh. Yeah, right, man. I never thought about it like that. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. And then you get in trouble for being angry, right?
Right.
And also, if the anger's been repressed, or if all, in fact, if all your other emotions have been repressed, and so your only emotional expression is through anger, and we get told to just keep cool, keep a lid on it, put it under the rug, when it does break out, it breaks out in violence quite often.
Yeah.
And that's not socially acceptable, obviously, because you're hurting people. Yeah, man. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. And quite frankly, it's not, when we talk about values and ethics, like it's not ethically or valuable for you to be violent, because then you regret and you become
Yeah,
ashamed and you create that self-fulfilling prophecy you talked about, but in
yeah,
negative circumstances,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because
Yeah, it's so true.
I'm always going to be this person. I'm always going to be that guy because I don't know
Yeah.
how to control myself.
Yeah. I've been doing what I can, right? And, you know, we're all perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
I've been doing what I can as a dad to encourage my boys. My boys are about to turn 18 and 16,
Yeah.
to encourage them to communicate, to encourage them to allow any emotion that they're feeling, and that they're safe to chat with me about any emotion. I remember one time when my younger boy would have been about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old, And it was the anniversary of my younger brother's death. He died on his motorbike 12 years ago. And we were leaving the shrine. We made a shrine for him on top of a cliff over the beach where we surf.
Yeah.
And every anniversary we'd go to this shrine, and we were leaving there and the tears were rolling down my face. And my 7-year-old son said to me, "Dad, I understand why we cry." I said, "Why is that, mate?" And he said, "Well, because you're feeling this strong emotion inside of you, and the tears bring it out of your body to the outside world. They free you of that emotion." And I just went, "Oh, kid, you are spot on,"
Jeez.
So my boys know that it's okay to cry.
Yeah.
That's at least one good thing.
The wisdom of children
it's cool.
is truly incredible.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. And so a few years later, we were at the grand final of the football code that we play here in Australia is AFL, Australian football. And we were at a farmhouse somewhere in a small town watching the grand final. And, everyone's drinking, the adults are all drinking beers and wine, and, there's nibbles and stuff. We're sitting down watching the game, and the team who won had been the underdogs. They hadn't won a grand final for 37 years, and they won. And then on the TV, one of the members of that team was crying. And there was a guy in the room behind us who'd had a few beers, and he said, "Oh, you bloody pussy, you bloody wimp, stop crying like a girl, blah, blah, blah." Both of my boys turned around completely earnestly, in unison, turned around to this guy and said, "What's wrong with men crying?" And this guy just went, "Oh, shit." Just took another slug on his beer, and they completely called him out. No, they were 100% honest. What is wrong with men crying? And this guy had nowhere to go with that. Man. And I insert proud dad moment here, right?
Hell yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. You're right. It's such a detrimental structure. I think, when we talk about culture, and those are the things that we have to be able to have, we circle around to communication. We need to be able to look at that and have communication about that, of saying, there's that quote going around about, strong men create good times, and good times create weak men, and weak men create weak time, or poor times. And that the idea is so generalizing, but so many people relate to it. And I think it's a problem. I think it's a massive problem when we think that good times create weak men, because this isn't weakness. What we are experiencing is not weakness. I don't think I'm weak,
No, man, it's resilience.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's resilience. You can be the strongest man in the whole wide world. You can have the biggest gun.
Yeah.
Right. And you can be the most unhappy human. It's funny when I agree with you, Dylan. We've got to evolve, man. We really have to, and we are, whether we like it or not. Evolution's happening, and change is a given. It is happening. People resist it because they're scared of it, because it's the unknown. But we really do need to evolve, man. I think we've got to let go of the old antiquated stereotypical ideas of what a man should be. That used to serve a purpose. It used to. Yep. It doesn't need to anymore. There's enough resources on this planet for everybody. It's just the mismanagement of resources that mean that some people are going without. Right. If we got smart about it, we'd all be living in an abundant place of we could actually achieve utopia. We've got everything we need for it. It's just that as a species, there's a lot of dysfunction. Humans are messed up, man. We do lots of stupid shit.
And I almost have to disagree with you.
Oh God, yes, please. I love that.
I'm a sociologist, right? That's what I studied. And I very much feel that, regardless of what you call it or not, I very much study human patterns.
Yeah.
I think no one will ever allow us to feel like we are in a utopia.
Yeah.
Because there will always be a segment of society that looks at it and says it's not good enough. Yeah,
for sure.
And so I think we'll get close someday, but I don't think it will ever be what a utopia would really look like.
No, man. I think I agree with you. I think suffering is necessary.
Yeah.
Because it is, and you can't have one without the other. You can't have happiness without sadness. Yeah. You can't have light without dark. 100%. I agree with you. I think what I was more suggesting is that the resource is there, but I don't think that humans will ever evolve to a point where we could live like that, you know, and manage that resource in a completely functional way.
Yeah.
You know, and that is what it is. And, you know, it's like we were talking about before with duality. At the same time, life really matters.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
And both coexist, and without each other don't exist. So this beautiful idea that, you know, the yin yang of it all. So, and I think choosing perspective is an art. You know, depending on the context, there are times when it is functional for me to go outside, stand under the stars, and remember that I'm on a tiny little speck in a solar system that's on the edge of a Milky Way galaxy, and it takes 140,000 years to cross this galaxy at the speed of light. And the Milky Way is one of billions of galaxies that we know of, right? There are times when it's functional for me to go out and remember that perspective and go, oh shit, my problems actually don't matter, right? But then there's other times when that perspective doesn't serve. Right. You know, when my teenage boys, one of my boys is suffering from anxiety and depression through COVID, and he's on his bed feeling suicidal, it's not going to help him for me to go, and man, we're just a speck on the edge of the Milky Way, don't worry about it, right? It's not appropriate. Right. I've got to sit with him and go, fuck, dude, this is full on and real for you right now, and feel him, you know. So I think the art of choosing the appropriate perspective is something worth investing time in, you know.
Absolutely. That's what I think the struggle is, realistically, because, you know, when we as fathers look at our sons, like, we've been through a whole life of experience, right? Like, and I think about this in terms of like how my son is going to look at women, right?
Yeah.
He's going to see my relationship with my wife, and we have fun, and I tell her what to do, she tells me what to do. But what he doesn't see, right, or what he has never seen, is how I walked through the concept of consent with her, because that was something completely separate from him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Me and my wife negotiated the terms of how we touch each other, how we appreciate each other, how we love each other, how we work together. And if I look at my son in 5 years when he has a girlfriend, and I say, what the fuck is wrong with you for doing this? Right. Partly that's my own fault, because I never looked at him and I never shared, this is how I treat your mother. This is how I work with your mother. This is how I communicate with your mother. This is how I confirmed that she wanted me to touch her.
Yeah.
Right? Because that, like, for men, that is a massive thing that needs to be understood right now more than ever, because women are only becoming more conscious of this idea that they don't have to be touched inappropriately without their consent
ever.
And this is so important, right? Like it has never been, it has always been important, but it's never, women have never had the power that they have right now, which is great, which is phenomenal, because but there's men fighting back against it, right? And that's the problem, is because we as fathers are not walking them through what we had to go through.
Yeah, like, I've written to this in my book, man. There's a chapter on this specific thing in my book, and what I've given at the end of each of the chapters in the book is hopefully some simple strategies for men to implement to make a difference. One of the chapters is about parenting and the conversations that we have with our boys. I've had these conversations with my boys.
Good.
You know, and I've brought it up because they're not going to ask, but whenever it seems like there's an appropriate segue into this, we talk about this kind of stuff, you know, and they'll either listen or they won't, but at least we've had the conversation.
I think the conversation consistently is what matters, right?
Yeah, like, completely.
I started having conversation. My boy, he's my stepson, right? Yeah. So he's not actually mine, but I treat him as such. He started asking me questions about mental health at 7 years old and 6 years old when he met me, right?
Yeah.
And I gave him honest answers, because who am I to lie to a child, right?
Yeah.
Did he understand everything? No, absolutely not. But what it allowed him to do is he realized that it was consistently safe to come back to these questions and revisit them. And I
Yeah.
would revisit the conversation and offer him the same perspective, maybe a little bit different depending on what we're talking about. But
Mm.
he saw consistency within me, and he started to recognize that Dylan's going to be honest with me. Dylan's going to be open with me. He's also
Mm.
going to allow me to ask these,
Yeah.
sometimes stupid questions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I help him understand, like, hey, listen, when you ask a question like that, this is oftentimes what people think. Now, it's not what I
Mm.
think. I know why you're asking this question, but
Mm.
understand this.
Mm.
Um, and it creates just what we've started talking about, is that open conversation of being able to
Yeah.
create, you know, it's not necessarily for that time where I need open conversation. It's for the time when he's sitting there thinking, I'm ashamed.
Yeah.
I feel guilty. I feel regretful. Dylan,
Yeah.
I'm struggling. Right.
Yeah, man. So
And
true.
that's come up.
So
It's,
true.
I recognize him. I pay attention to him and I ask him, like, what's going on? And he, like, he
Yeah.
knows, he knows when he knows when I know. And so
Yeah.
when I hit that mark, you just, it's, it's almost it's the most emotional yet freeing moment as a father, when you
Mm.
recognize that, and he knows, and he opens, right? That vulnerability, the floodgates. It's like, I'm really sad because you feel this way, but I'm also incredibly, like, relieved that you're able to actually feel this with me.
So much so, man. And, this is something that you didn't have because your dad wasn't around,
Yeah.
through those teenage years. And this is something that I didn't have because my dad wasn't available on this level.
Yeah.
And so something that you and I are giving to our sons, which is that, you can tell me anything. You really can. And you don't have to. There's going to be some stuff that they need to keep to themselves as they
Yeah.
develop their own sense of independence. But if they're ever troubled or worried and they've got no one to talk to, man, let's sit down and talk.
Yeah.
So important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's, when I see that, that's when I feel fulfilled as a dad,
Yeah. Yeah.
like that. I feel fulfilled as a dad, just in general, of seeing him kind of grow up. But I really feel fulfilled when I see what I never got,
Yeah, completely.
and
Completely. How old is he now?
he's going to be 11 in September.
Uh-huh.
So I've been with him basically 5 or 6 years now.
Uh-huh. Yeah, beautiful, man.
Yeah.
I've had a lovely kind of shift with my partner's two children. Because to begin with, I'm just Jem, right? You're not my dad. And I said, no, I'm not your dad. You've got your dad. I'm not trying to replace anybody.
Yeah.
Your mum and I are just in love with each other and really good for each other. And then over the time, it's just shifted. It's really beautiful. And, my girl now lets me think of her as my girl, and it's all understood, and she's completely fine. She looks at me and she goes, you always wanted a daughter, didn't you? And I'm like, yeah, I did. I kind of felt a bit ripped off. I never got a daughter. She looks at me and she goes, don't tell anyone, but you've got one now. So yeah,
That's
it's
so
beautiful,
cute.
man. Yeah, it's really, 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 really cute. And so all four kids now have just got to the point where they're blended. It took them time, and
Yeah.
but they just say, oh, look, he's just my brother. It's easier than saying that's my mum's boyfriend's
Yeah.
son. So they just go, oh yeah, he's just my brother. So
Right.
we're getting there.
It's a beautiful thing. And yeah, I love it. I'm about to have a little baby girl in June. So
Oh wow, congratulations, man.
it's incredibly, like, I look at my life and I'm like, I don't know how I made it here.
Yeah.
Just 7 years ago, one more millimeter of pressure and I wouldn't have been here, and
Oh wow, man.
I look at that and I see, I see that I have Val, I see that I have Avery, my wife, my son.
Yeah.
I have now a little baby girl coming. I have this
Yeah.
impact on a world. Like, I have my own book, I have my podcast, like,
Wow.
I'm
And
talking.
one
I'm,
millimeter away,
yeah,
and that girl, that little baby girl, would never exist.
yeah, this
That
is,
that particular human life would never come. Wow, man.
that's it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I found this
Yeah.
one day in my,
Uh-huh.
cleaning out my basement, and I found that in a bag, and I remember putting it in the bag, and I'm like, wow, I
Wow,
still
man,
have
I
it.
just got shivers all down my spine.
It's, I keep it just to remind myself of how close.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to,
Yeah.
because it's, I don't need the reminder. Like I can certainly understand, like I remember that, but when I see that
Yeah.
sometimes, and when I pick it up and I tell people about this story, it's incredibly powerful. To,
Absolutely. And for you, and also for people who get to hear the story, and not all of them, but the right ones, you sharing that with me right now, has just reminded me in this moment of how precious our lives are and how grateful I am for everything I've got, so keep sharing your story, man, whenever you feel to,
absolutely.
because it's good. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. I just cannot even imagine what it's like to go through what you've been through. And I remember, I've traveled a lot. I actually walked up to Afghanistan in the 90s, and
Jeez.
I was in Pakistan. I was traveling in Pakistan,
The
and
ballsy
I had a
move.
yeah, I was a little bit of a crazy traveler, and it was actually in 1998 when America sent cruise missiles in to try and kill Osama bin Laden back in 98. This
I
is
was
when
gonna say
jihad really got declared, right?
that's Taliban time.
Yeah, it was Taliban time, man. And
Yep.
I went into the Northwestern Frontier Province disguised as a Pakistani man. I didn't have to try too hard. I had a long beard and I was wearing shalwar kameez and speaking a little bit of Urdu. But anyway, I was up in the Kalash Valleys, which is these beautiful valleys, and the people there, they believe, are descendants of Alexander the Great. So they've got blonde hair and blue eyes, and
Yeah.
this kind of thing. And I knew I was at the bottom of the valley of the border with Afghanistan. And so me and this English backpacker, I said, "Hey man, do you want to walk up and walk up to the top of the mountain or up to the top of the pass?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So we took some hash with us and some water and a bit of food. And the locals said, "Be careful when you walk past this village. They don't like foreigners, and the kids will throw rocks at you to try and keep you away." So we dodged the rocks and we got past that village. And sure enough, we walked up to the pass. And so over the back was Afghanistan, and then in front of us was Pakistan. And we sat there and we smoked a joint. And this Taliban dude rocked up on a horse with an automatic weapon. He just looked at us and he's like, goes like this, which means, "What the
Yep.
fuck are you doing?"
Yep.
And we just went, just smoking a joint, having a look at the view and everything. And he pointed at us with his AK-47, whatever the gun was, maybe a Kalashnikov or something. He pointed at us with his gun and then pointed back down the mountain saying, "You go." And we went, yeah, no worries. Assalamu
Gotcha.
alaikum. And we'll just go back down the hill.
That's
So
funny.
that's as close as I got. But anyway, man, I remember when I was traveling when I was younger, and I would meet guys my age from countries where they had to serve, so whether it was South Africa or whether it was countries where they had to go as kids, 18, 19-year-olds, Israelis and people like this, who had to go and do what you've done. They didn't have a choice. And as an Australian, I mean, talk about privilege, man. It's just the most peaceful country here. There's none of that going on. And I would try to empathize with you guys and what you've been through, but you can't, man. There's no way I could imagine what it would be actually like to go through what you've gone through, And so, yeah, my heart expands when I meet you and hear your stories and hear about how you've healed, and the fact that you're still here and that you're a father, and that you're sharing your stories and other people's stories for people to listen to, and that. And I'm just like, thank you.
Yeah. I'm happy.
So cool.
It's, I get emotional when I say that, because I realize for how long in my life I never had that. Like it's remarkable to just relish in that, and how important it is to see all that I've been through, and to recognize that it's possible. If there's anything that I try to do with not only this podcast, but my book, my content, my podcast, everything that I do, is to try and show people it's fucking possible.
Yeah, man.
Is it gonna work for everybody? I don't know. I'm not here to tell. I'm not here to judge that or determine that. What I am saying is, if you quit, you will not get there. I promise you. Right? Because if I would have quit, I'm here now. I'm doing work that is, I mean, beyond anything that I ever could have had the capacity to understand back then.
Yeah.
You know, I never would have guessed I would have been a husband. I never would have guessed I would have been a father to both my stepson and now a little girl. Never would have guessed I would have, you know, been a writer, for God's sake. You know, never would have thought I would have, you know, I achieved the dream last year of being a sniper. So now I achieved that dream. I've achieved so many dreams in the past 2 years. I'm like, what's my limit? You know, like I'm at a point where you look at my story and you're like, damn, but I'm not that impressive. Like I'm not, I'm not, I'm not
special.
I'm not special. I'm just a dude that that struggled through life. And the only thing that I think I'm incredibly good at is just being stubborn enough to not give up. That's it. That's all I think it is.
And you got lucky. We got lucky, you know, like I was chatting with a friend the other day and he said, yeah, but I create my own luck. And I said, yeah, but you're lucky to be someone who knows how to create their own luck.
Yeah.
There's a lot of luck involved. You know, if you and I had been born in a village in Sierra Leone, it would have been a really different story.
Absolutely.
But there are kids who are born there and some of them are born stubborn and some of them are born not, you know, so this tenacity piece that you're talking about, we got lucky that we're tenacious because it certainly helps, you know, this thing of I'm not going to give up, you know, and that was the thing that kept me holding on to a glimmer of hope back in my marriage when it was really not happy days and I was dysfunctional, but I just had this glimmer of hope that I couldn't let go of, that I could sort this shit out. I could sort myself out, that I could be functional again one day. And I just wouldn't let go of it, you know, and I'm glad I didn't, because I was, every other part of me just wanted to give up.
Right.
You know, so yeah, it's true, man. You know, just if you keep going, but that thing that you said before of, that you can show what's possible and that you're not special. We're all just humans, but you look back on your life and what you've gone through and the fact that you're still here and all those things, that you're happy now, you know, and you're living this beautiful work with meaning, and you're a father and a partner and all of this beautiful stuff. And that story, just as a story for someone who doesn't know you and hears that story, if there's one person out of 1,000 that gets inspired by that and goes, fuck, I can do this, man.
Yeah,
I'm going to hang on, you know, then it's worthwhile sharing the story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If people, I don't care if people look at me and be like, that guy did it. That doesn't bother me. Like that does not insult me. Like I'm not that impressive of a person. Like
if he can do it, anyone can do it.
Exactly. Like I am not bothered by that. If you think I'm not that cool, you're right. Like just fucking live. Right.
Yeah. That's right, man. Yeah. Look, I also believe that happiness is available. When I say happiness, I don't mean happy, sad, happy, not the fleeting happiness.
Right.
I'm talking about deep contentment, deep joy, peace. I'm talking about peace, right? Is available to everybody if you want it right now. Not when you buy the house, not when you're earning 7 figures. No, now, right now. You know, my family in the Himalaya live in this tiny little village, and compared to us, they're poor, right? They don't have much money. They live off the land pretty much. They're happy, like every day happy, every day content, every day beautiful. You know, and so it's accessible, man. And then we get sold on this bullshit that, you know, you got to get the best job, earn the most money, get the best house, get the best car, and you'll get happiness. That's just total crap. You know, it doesn't mean happiness. All that stuff doesn't. And happiness is available right now.
It sure is. It sure is, man. I love conversations like this. You see why I said in the beginning, I was talking to Jim before, this is why I say this is a selfish endeavor first, right? Like this podcast, I love these conversations because not only is it kind of confirmation for the thoughts that I've always had of like how we look at communication and all this stuff, but it's genuinely awesome to have conversations with people like yourself. Genuinely.
I forgot we're on a podcast, man.
Right. Like
I've just met this cool dude. I'm having a chat with him. I'm loving it.
This is just a Zoom call at this point. Just having a good conversation with a good friend. You know, like this is why
about stuff that matters, right?
Yeah.
about stuff that matters, not just about the two-dimensional surface layer, not about the facade.
Yeah.
You know, I get bored quite quickly and easily in conversations that are just on the facade. I'm kind of
Yep.
switch off and I'm like, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I'm just not interested in this
Right.
conversation.
Yeah.
You know.
I think a lot of people do. And I think a lot of people are kind of yearning for this more intellectually focused, what's next? What can we do? How can we kind of understand ourselves? And like people are looking for this stuff. This is why social media is so big, and
Mm.
everything on social media isn't focused around sex. It's not
Yeah,
anymore,
yeah.
right?
No, not anymore, man. There's so
Like
many good podcasts.
it's intellectual. Like we're trying to understand our lives. We're trying to understand ourselves, and it's happening. I think real growth is really coming in the next decade to 2 decades of really
Yeah.
being able to have conversations about a lot more.
Yeah. And at the
In this.
start, at the top of the conversation, you were talking about how, what's going to fill this void where religion used to sit in terms of giving us moral guidelines and structure. And what's going to fill that void. And I think we are having to kind of fill that void now with good, solid conversations. We're trying to make it up, right?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm just curious, Dylan. Can you hear in the background the gunshots?
a
You
little
can't, you
bit.
missed it a little
I
bit.
thought someone was knocking on the door for a second there,
No,
but
man. So I live on a farm. I live on a 300-acre farm, and I don't run the farm. We live in the farmhouses, but
sure.
there's a farmer who runs his sheep here, and I think he must have just had to shoot a couple of sheep, sick sheep. So that's what the gunshots were.
All good. It's
There
all
you
good.
go.
I can
Yeah.
I can edit that part out too
Or
easy.
you can just leave it in, and people know that we're real people sitting in real places.
Honestly, that's probably a better idea. I've only edited out like 2 podcasts out of like 41. So,
Yeah.
and it was like the person had to walk out and then like go deal with something and then come back in like 3 minutes later. I'm like,
Right.
I'll edit this out.
Yeah. Good.
It's staying. It's staying in.
Good man. Good man. I was, because I was thinking before about how you hunt and, how you're experienced with guns and all that. So it was funny for me because the gun shots don't go off here very often. It's a wool farm. So,
Yep.
You'll hear the sheep bleating when it's time to shear them. But not often does he have to put a sheep down, and he just did then. So there you go.
Happens. It's life.
It does, man. It is life. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's, speaking of that, I'm really glad my boys have grown up on a farm. They know where their food comes from.
Right.
They know where wool comes from. They know where the eggs come from because we run chooks. There's a lot of kids in the city. And, Jamie Oliver, that chef from England. Have you heard of Jamie Oliver?
Yep.
And he does these shows where he goes into a school in the city and he asks the kids,
Yep.
where does chicken come from? And they say the supermarket. And he's like, no, but where does it come from before the supermarket? And they're like, from the factory. And he goes, well, what tell me where that actually comes from. They don't even know that chicken comes from chicken.
Yeah.
From a chicken.
Right.
They don't even put 2 and 2 together. They don't know that a steak comes from a cow.
Yeah.
This is millions and millions of kids that don't know this. It's
Yeah.
like, wow, talk about detached.
Yeah. And then there's almost a bit of trauma involved when they actually find out.
I
Right.
reckon.
Like when the reality is like I grew up on a farm, it was
Yep.
more of a ranch style farm, but I grew up in a place where you understood that stuff. Like
Yeah.
we had a butcher shop, a quarter mile down the road, and we'd walk there and we'd
Yep.
bring back there'd be meat everywhere. And we're like, oh, wow. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. I was a cow,
Yeah.
and it was never, initially it was like kind of a shock, but it wasn't you're 15 years old and you see a chicken get its head cut off in a YouTube video and you're like, that's where we get chickens from.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like it's not that trauma. And then people are like, I'm going to go vegan or I'm going to go, paleo or whatever. Like it's not that, not saying those diets are wrong in any way, but we've been eating chickens for millions of years.
Yeah.
We've been
My
eating birds.
sister and her husband run an organic beef farm, small
Yeah.
micro farm. And so for their kids and my nephews and for my boys, the cows but they know exactly why the cows are there.
Yep.
They treat the cows beautifully. These cows have a wonderful life.
Yep.
They're healthy. It's all organic. they free roam, grass fed, beautiful. They get looked after, they get loved. And then when it's time, they get, butchered and we eat them.
Yep.
And that's just normal.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
It is. It is. We could probably talk about a lot of different conversations for a couple hours at this point. But for lack of more time, maybe we should call it here. Maybe we should have another episode another time.
I'd love to chat with you whenever, man. It's been really on a selfish level as well. I've got a lot from it, so thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Jem, I got to ask you the question, we talked about a little bit earlier, and you got to give me an answer. So if there was one message you could leave the world, what would it be?
You are exactly enough, and you are exactly who you're supposed to be in this moment right now.
Too easy. Too easy. Jem, thank you for coming on. It's been an honor to me. It's been a pleasure to have a wonderful conversation with you. And I absolutely thank you for getting in touch with me and doing this. It's been great.
Yeah, likewise, Dylan. Thank you. It's been really cool to meet you, man. I want to read you my book. I want to read your book. And I was thinking that maybe if we swap addresses, I'll send you my book and you can send me yours. That'd be great.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I was going to say, I would love to read yours as well. Did you by chance put yours on Audible?
It's being post-productioned and post-produced now. So I've recorded it. I recorded it a month ago. And the engineer, my local engineer here, is working his way through the chapters, cutting out all the snorts and swallows and stuff. And so, yeah, in answer to your question, I'm hoping by Easter, mid-April, it should be ready.
Perfect. So Audible's awesome because you can actually give free codes. So I will get you a free code to my Audible because my Audible is actually a lot more in depth than my book it is.
Cool.
And I would love yours.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah, I love Audible, and it's the only thing that gives me enough time to actually read a book. So
yeah, because you can listen to a book while you're going for a run, right?
Yep, absolutely. That's what I do.
Yeah, same.
Jem, this has been awesome. And if you're in the audience and you're still listening, make sure you go check out Jem. Any links to any of this stuff that he's got will be down below. To your book, to your TED Talk, to anything else you've got, I'll make sure it's down below. But again, thank you very much. If you're still listening, thank you very much. And we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience.